I'm going to start from Sheni. We had mentioned yesterday that soon after the plague, the 24,000 people who died as a result of the engaging with the women of Moab and the Baal Peor, this idolatry. So immediately Hashem says, and Moshe wants to have the Jews counted. So we begin counting them. Pasuk K, Sheni. So we start from the first tribe, Ruvain. Ruvain, B'chor Yisrael. Ruvain is the firstborn of Yisrael. B'nai Ruvain, Chanoch. Mishpach Chanochi. The sons of Ruvain, Chanoch is one of the sons. The family of Chanochi. Lafalu, Mishpach Palui. This is the first time I'm sensitive to this. We find that the children of Yaakov referred to as Bnei Yaakov and Bnei Yisrael. If you take a look back in Vayechi, it refers to them there as the sons of Yaakov. And when he blesses them, he says, listen to this blessing of your father Yisrael. So we always point out that whenever we speak about the spirituality of Klal Yisrael, and we being beneficiaries of Yaakov's more advanced level, after he fought with the angel, there was a transition in dimension of status from Yaakov to Yisrael, and we are the Bnei Yisrael, which represents the eternity of the Jewish people. But when we speak about Yaakov, the father, as the father, it's always Yaakov. Whatever it has relevance to the destiny of Klal Yisrael, like the blessings or many other things, it's Yisrael. But when he's represented as the father fathering his children, he's Bnei Yaakov. They have the sons of Yaakov. Over here it says we're tracing and trying to evaluate the numbers of Jews. Ruvain, the B'chor Yisrael. Ruvain, the B'chor Yisrael. It doesn't say Ruvain, the B'chor of Yaakov. Right? I mean, we're talking about Ruvain, the son of Yaakov. But yet, he's identified here as B'chor Yisrael, the B'chor of Yisrael, meaning Yaakov as that spiritual person. Now, why exactly? We'll see in a moment. Oh, we be counted here. So Rashi yesterday had mentioned, what is it analogous to? A wolf going into a flock, and he killed some of the sheep, the wolf, or the sheep or the herd killed some of the cattle. So the shepherd or the herdsman wants to make an evaluation to see what's left. How many are left? How many sheep, how many of the cattle are left? So this is a demonstration of expression of the love of and concern of the shepherd for its flock. This is an expression of Hashem's love for us. He continues counts us whenever something happens to see how many were lost. That's the counting. But over here, it's within a context of spirituality, because we find Chanoch Mishpach Chanochi, Palu Mishpach Palui. It could have said Chanoch Mishpach Chanoch. Chanoch, his family is called Chanoch. Palu is Mishpachas HaPalu. What's the extra HaChanochi and HaPalui? And the next Chetzro Mishpach Chatzroni, Lakarmi Mishpach Karmi, to Rashi. Take a look, Rashi, hey. The nations of the world were disgracing the Jewish people. What's the value of tracing their pedigree and talking about their purity? Is there even a consideration that the Egyptians didn't defile their wives? If they dominated their bodies, they tortured them, they beat them, they killed them. So definitely, a man is attracted to a woman. They definitely must have defiled them, raped them, whatever. So if that's the case, do they really think for a moment that their children are the children of their fathers? They're all descendants of the Egyptians. Therefore, Hashem associates his name of Yud-Kei with every one of the tribes. Hey mitzad zeh, Hashem, Yud-Kei, 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 Yud-K Yud mitzad zeh. It opens, the family starts with Ha, Hey, and it concludes with the Yud. Loma made on the Alechem. So Hashem says, I attest personally, Shem b'nei avoseim, the day of the children of the paternal line, of their fathers. Zehu mefurish aydei David, and David expresses this. Shiftei Kor, they are the Shiftei Kor. They're the tribes of Yud Hey, because Hashem personally attested to the purity of the Jewish people, despite what the world says. Eidus Yisrael, and that is the testament for Yisrael. Now, this is important. Eidus Yisrael. Yisrael is always the spiritual aspect, the spiritual characteristic of the Jewish people, which is the basis for our eternity. If God forbid the Jewish people, it would be a question what their pedigree is. Are they descend from the Egyptians or the Jews? Then it's not that spiritual component is not there. So therefore, Shiftei Ko, because Hashem Yud Kei attested to their purity, he is the Eidus Li Yisrael. He is the Eidus, the testimony for the spiritual character of the Jewish people. Okay? Some say it's Reuven Bechor Yisrael. It doesn't say Reuven Bechor Yaakov. Reuven the Bechor of Yaakov as the father. Here we speak within the context of establishing their spiritual component, to confirm over here that nothing has changed in terms of the spiritual status. And what the world says is irrelevant, because Hashem himself is testifying to their pedigree, that their pedigree is from the Jews and not from Egyptians. Hashem hazeh meid aleim shemisyasim l'shavteim. Yud Kei is testifying, and he's tracing the pedigree to their shvatim. Lefichach kulon kosev hachanochi hapalui. If every one of the families, you have the Hey and the Yud. Al ben Yimno, the family will come to Yimno luhutzach lo mishpachas hayimni. It doesn't have to add the Yud at the end. Fish Hashem kavua bo, because the Yud and the Hey are part of the name. Yud berosh, Vei besof. Quoting the Midrash. So we once asked the question. I mean, we've been counted multiple times since we left Egypt. And since we've left, we've been counted multiple times, and it was never Yud Hey. Hashem never attested for us, about us, our pedigree. We were counted as the families. Chanoch, Palu, whatever the families were. All of a sudden now, after the story of Benos Moav and the Midian and the Balpor, now Hashem all of a sudden has to respond to what the nations of the world are saying, that who do you think you're kidding? You're fooling yourselves. Do you think your pedigree is pure? You think you're spiritual blue bloods? You come from Egyptians. So therefore Hashem has to attest. Why now? Why not before? So we had said, until now, the Jews never, ever breached the area of this area of proprietary relationships between men and women. The only woman who was raped in the 210-year period that were in Egypt was Shlomis Bas Divri. That's the story with the Makalia. Every other Jewish woman, the Egyptians never approached them. There was a special it's unheard of. There was a divine protection, which we'll discuss in a moment, which watched over the Jewish women, that the Egyptian men, although they were taskmasters, they were the masters, they never approached a Jewish woman. There was a special divine protection. Now, because the Jews themselves breached this area of proprietary relationship, that they went and engaged, and they violated it with the Moabite women, Midianite women, therefore now also they come a question. The world says, they're no different than we are. And because we're no different than we are, therefore, the question arises. And now Hashem has to respond to that question, and therefore he attests to that purity. That's what we once said. I was just thinking something else while I'm speaking. We find the beginning of Bamidbar, which is numbers we were counted. It says when they were counted, they brought the documents of pedigree. It says they brought the documents of pedigree to prove their pedigree. So the Midrash, there's a Yalkut, the Gemara tells us that before Hashem gave the Torah at Sinai, he offered the Torah to the nations of the world. He offered the nations of the world, and each one turned it down for his own reason. Okay? So later, when he gave it to us, they have nothing to say. But the Yalkut, which is another compilation of measures, says differently, that after Hashem had given the Torah to the Klal Yisrael, to the Jewish people, the nations of the world come to Hashem, says, why did you offer it to us? Why did you only offer it to the Jews? So he says to them, could you bring your documents of pedigree to prove the purity of pedigree? He says, all you people, your products, your issues of adultery and incest and everything else. And if that's the case, you don't meet the standard to be God's people. The Jewish people, they can prove their pedigree, you can't. So when they heard that, the nations of the world, they were taken aback. So this is Hashem speaking to them. It says, Komu voneh v'yashua. The pasuk we sing in Eishes Chayil. Komu voneh v'yashua. The sons rose and they extolled. They extolled Klal Yisrael. It's unheard of. How do people not engage in whatever they engage in? The whole world engaged in that. But yet the Jews were pure in this area. So there at Sinai already, Hashem already put his stamp of purity on what? On Klal Yisrael. Because that was the claim. Why did you offer it to them? Why did you offer it to us? He says, because you people, there's not even consideration because you don't meet the grade. The Jewish people, they meet the grade. So at that point, there was never a question any longer in terms of who we were. So what happens? So the Midrash says, when it came to Baal Peor and the Jews engaged and violated this area, so the nations of the world say, the Jews are no longer qualified. We should become disqualified. And if we're disqualified, now you should offer the Torah to us. The Jews should not be able to retain the Torah. So Hashem says, whoever engaged, they died in the plague. So therefore, we weeded out all the impurity and what remains of the Jewish people, they're purebreds. There's no impurity in their lineage. So it comes out initially, until this point, there was not a question because at Sinai, the nations came and said, what did you offer to us? Hashem responded. So as a result of that, there was nothing to talk about. But after the Baal Peor, when they failed, as the rest of them failed, they said, so how could they continue maintaining that relationship? They're no better than we are. Hashem says, no, the ones who remain, they are pure because anybody who engaged with the Baal Peor, with these women, they died in the plague. So therefore, the question is not a question. And therefore, he let it, that silence, that claim. I'm just saying. So according to the Midrash, which I'm mentioning now, Hashem personally tested at Sinai who the Jews were. So there was never a consideration even to say anything. Now, Hashem responded, again, whoever engaged died in the plague. According to the Gemara, not the Midrash, where it was it was offered to the world, and then they turned it down, then it was offered to us, so their question was a question. So now our question is a question. So why only now did they ask this question? Who are you fooling? You people are deluding yourself. If they controlled your bodies, you don't think they controlled your women? So the answer is because the Jews were pure in this area. There was never consideration. It was unheard of that they should ever cross these lines. But now that they are crossing the lines, all of a sudden say, maybe we were naive until now. Till now, we never considered, but we see they're no different than we are. So maybe they're not. So who are they fooling? Therefore, Hashem has to now attest to their purity by the Hey and the Yud say, I personally attest to their purity. And that's the pasuk in Tilim, Shiftei Koch. They're the Shvatim who were identified with Yud Hey, Eidus Yisrael. That is the testimony for the purity of Klal Yisrael. Good. Alan. You're muted. You're muted.
You're muted.
I'm sorry, better? Better?
Yeah, now, yeah.
Thank you. I was thinking